The ship broke through the clouds of Planet 7, and Park pressed his face against the window like a child. Below him stretched an endless sea of black and purple trees, the Blackwood, the most dangerous forest in the known galaxy. He had spent 6 years studying its history, reading reports of failed expeditions, memorizing the names of scientists who had died trying to understand it. Now he was finally here. The Galactic Union had classified 7 as a death world 3,000 years ago. No alien species had survived more than 72 hours inside the Blackwood. The trees moved when no one was watching. The air itself seemed to fight against anyone who breathed it. The soil swallowed bodies whole, leaving nothing behind. 243 researchers from 12 different species had entered the forest over the centuries. None had returned alive. Was not afraid. He knew he should be, but fear had never come easily to him. His grandmother had taught him that fear of nature was the first step toward destroying it. She had spent her entire life restoring the forests of Korea after the climate wars had nearly burned them all away. She had walked into dying forests when everyone else ran from them. She had taught to do the same. The transport ship landed at Base Camp Sigma, a collection of metal buildings surrounded by energy barriers at the forest's edge. Stepped off the ramp and immediately felt the difference in the air. It was thick, heavy, filled with smells he could not name. The trees stood less than 100 meters away, their dark trunks rising like walls into a purple sky. Commander was waiting for him. There was nearly 3 meters tall, with a hard shell covering his body and 4 arms that never stopped moving. His species had led most of the expeditions to the Blackwood. They had also lost the most people. "You are the human botanist," said. His voice came through a translator device, flat and without emotion. "I was told you requested this assignment." "I did," replied. "Why would anyone request to come here?" Looked at the forest. Something in there was watching him. He could feel it the same way he could feel sunlight on his skin. Because someone needs to understand it. Made a sound that might have been a laugh. Understanding is not the mission. The Union wants answers. Why does the forest kill? What makes it hostile? How can we neutralize the threat? He gestured toward the dark trees with 2 of his arms. Those are the questions that matter. Did not argue. He had learned long ago that arguing with military commanders was pointless. They saw the universe in terms of threats and assets, enemies and resources. The forest was a problem to be solved, nothing more. He spent his first week at Base Camp Sigma reviewing data and meeting the rest of the expedition team. There were 37 researchers from 8 different species, plus a security force of another 50 soldiers. They made up most of the military presence, but there were also a handful of humans. Lieutenant found him on his 3rd night, sitting alone at the edge of the barrier, staring at the forest. "You are Park," she said. It was not a question. He looked up at her. She was tall for a human woman, with short black hair and scars on her hands that spoke of years of combat. "Have we met?" "No, but I served with your brother during the frontier wars. He saved my life twice." She sat down beside him without asking permission. "He talked about you sometimes, said you were the strange one in the family, said you preferred trees to people." Smiled slightly. He was not wrong. "He also said you could walk into any forest on Earth and come out alive, no matter how dangerous." Looked at the Blackwood. "Is that true?" "Earth forests are different. They know humans. We grew up together in a way. This forest has never met anything like us." "And you think that matters?" Was quiet for a long moment. In the darkness beyond the barrier he could see faint lights moving between the trees, not artificial lights, something alive, something glowing. "I think everything matters. Every species that came here brought weapons and scanners and collection drones. They came to take things from the forest. Maybe the forest noticed." Raised an eyebrow. "You think it is intelligent?" "I think we do not know what it is, and that is the problem." That night the screaming started. was lying in his bunk when the sound cut through the walls of the habitat module. It was not a human scream, not an animal scream, not anything his brain could process. It was high and sharp and endless, rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks. The other researchers stumbled out of their bunks, some covering their ears, others reaching for weapons. Commander's voice came over the intercom. All personnel remain inside the barriers. This is not an attack. Repeat, this is not an attack. The forest produces these sounds regularly. They are not directed at us. But was not so sure. He pulled on his boots and walked to the barrier's edge. The screaming was louder here, so loud it made his teeth ache. He could see the trees shaking, their branches whipping back and forth even though there was no wind. The forest was upset, not attacking, upset. There was a difference, though he could not explain how he knew. He did something that surprised even himself. He started to hum. It was an old song, one his grandmother had taught him when he was very young. A song about mountains that remembered the people who had walked on them. A song about patience and time and the slow healing of wounds. He did not sing the words, just hummed the melody, low and soft, almost lost beneath the screaming. The screaming began to fade. Not all at once, but slowly, like a child crying itself to sleep. The trees stopped shaking. The lights in the darkness grew still. Within minutes, the forest was silent. Lieutenant appeared beside him. Her hand was on her weapon, but she had not drawn it. "What did you do?" "I do not know," admitted. "I just responded." She stared at him for a long moment. "The commander will want to know about this." "Probably. He will want to study you, run tests, figure out what made the forest react to you." Nodded. He had expected that. Looked at the forest, then back at him. "I will not tell him, not yet, not until we understand more." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because my gut tells me you are the only chance this expedition has, and I have learned to trust my gut." Turned back to the forest. The darkness between the trees was absolute now, deep and still. But he could feel something watching him, not with hostility, with something else. Something he had felt before, long ago, when he was a boy walking through the mountains and a deer had stopped in his path and looked at him and decided he was not a threat. The forest was making the same decision about him now. He did not know if he would pass the test. He did not know what would happen if he failed. But for the first time since arriving on 7, he felt something that might have been hope. "Good night," he whispered to the trees. The forest did not answer, but somewhere deep inside it, something shifted. Something remembered the sound of his humming. Something began, for the first time in 3,000 years, to wonder if maybe not all outsiders were the same. 3 days passed without incident. The forest remained silent, and Commander grew impatient. He had brought the largest expedition in 50 years to 7, and he intended to return with results. His superiors at the Galactic Union expected answers, not silence. On the 4th morning, he ordered the science team to begin sample collection. Watch from the barrier as 4 researchers prepared their collection drones. The machines were small, no bigger than a human fist, designed to cut tiny samples from plants without causing significant damage. They had been tested on thousands of worlds. They were supposed to be safe. "This is a mistake," said quietly. Lieutenant stood beside him. "I know, but I cannot stop it." The drones lifted off and crossed the tree line. For a moment, nothing happened. The machines hovered near the nearest trees, their cutting tools extending toward the bark. Then the forest woke up. The ground exploded. Roots burst from the soil like striking snakes, snatching the drones from the air and crushing them in seconds. Vines descended from the canopy, thick as human arms, whipping toward the researchers who stood too close to the edge. The air changed, becoming thick with yellow spores that made everyone cough and choke. 2 researchers were too slow. The vines caught them before they could retreat behind the barrier. heard their screams as the forest pulled them into the darkness between the trees. The sounds cut off quickly, too quickly. Commander called for orbital support but was already shaking her head. It will not work. They tried burning the Blackwood 1,000 years ago. It grew back in a month, angrier than before. The commander's 4 arms trembled with rage. Then what do you suggest, Lieutenant? Stepped forward before could answer. Send me in. Everyone turned to look at him. The human botanist, small and quiet and completely unarmed, made a sound of disgust. You would be dead in an hour. Maybe, but the forest responded to me before. When it was screaming, I calmed it down. It knows I am different. You hummed a song, that proves nothing. It proves the forest is listening. It is not just killing randomly. It is reacting to threats, to intrusions, to things it does not understand. Looked at the tree line where the vines had retreated back into the canopy. Your drones came to take something from it. I will not take anything. I will give. Laughed a harsh clicking sound. Give what? You have nothing the forest could want. Reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were seeds, oak, pine, and a single cutting from a ginkgo tree. His grandmother had given him the cutting before he left Earth. She had grown the tree herself from a seed that had survived the climate wars. It was over 100 years old. I will give it these, he said. A gift, something from my world to plant in its soil. The commander stared at him as if he had lost his mind. You want to enter the most dangerous forest in the galaxy to plant seeds? Yes. Spoke before could refuse. Let him try. Humans have a reputation in this galaxy, Commander. We survive things we should not. We adapt to conditions that kill other species. If anyone has a chance of making contact with the Blackwood, it is one of us. Considered this for a long moment. His species had lost more people to the Blackwood than any other. He had lost friends here, colleagues, an entire team of researchers who had been under his command. Part of him wanted revenge. Part of him wanted to burn the whole planet to ash. But another part of him, a small part he rarely listened to, wanted answers. Fine, he said at last. You may enter, but I am not sending a rescue team when you die. Nodded, I would not expect you to. He entered the Blackwood at dawn, carrying only water, his journal, and the seeds from Earth. The moment he crossed the tree line, the temperature dropped. The light faded, filtered through layers of purple and black leaves until everything around him existed in shadow. The forest tested him immediately. A root rose from the ground, trying to trip him. He stepped over it slowly, without panic. A branch swung toward his face. He ducked, waited for it to swing past, then continued walking. The air grew thick with spores that burned his lungs. He pulled his shirt over his nose and breathed shallowly, never stopping, never running. Running would be a mistake. Running would mark him as prey. His grandmother had taught him how to walk through angry forests. During the Restoration years, she had entered places so damaged by pollution and fire that they seemed to fight against any human presence. She had moved slowly, deliberately, showing the dying trees that she meant no harm. She had spent days in those places, sometimes weeks, waiting for the ecosystem to accept her. Did the same thing now. By midday, he had traveled less than a kilometer. The forest had thrown everything at him. Vines tried to grab his ankles. Strange insects with too many legs crawled across his path. The trees themselves seemed to lean toward him, their branches reaching like fingers. But he was still alive. When the attacks grew strongest, he stopped walking and sat down. He closed his eyes and breathed, letting the forest feel his heartbeat, his calmness, his complete lack of hostility. He stayed like that for hours sometimes, not moving, not thinking, just existing in the same space as the trees. Slowly, the attacks began to fade. By nightfall, he had found a small clearing. The ground here was soft, covered with something that looked almost like moss. He knelt and touched it, feeling the warmth beneath the surface. The soil on this planet was alive in ways Earth's soil had never been. He unwrapped the seeds from his pocket, the ginkgo cutting first. It was small, fragile, barely more than a twig with a few pale roots attached. He dug a hole in the alien soil with his bare hands and placed the cutting inside. Then he covered it with dirt, packed it gently, and poured a little water around the base. "Grow," he whispered, "if you can." The ground beneath him shuddered. Froze. The tremor was not violent, not an attack. It felt almost like a question, like the forest was asking what he had just done. "I gave you something," he said aloud, knowing the forest could not understand his words, but hoping it might understand his intention. "A piece of my world, a gift." The trembling stopped. The clearing fell silent, but something had changed. Could feel it in the air, in the soil beneath his knees, in the darkness that surrounded him. The forest was no longer trying to kill him. It was watching him, studying him, trying to understand what kind of creature would walk into certain death and offer a gift instead of taking a sample. Smiled and opened his journal. He began to write, recording everything he had observed since entering the Blackwood, the way the trees moved, the patterns of the attacks, the moment the forest had stopped fighting him. He wrote until his hand cramped, then lay back on the moss and looked up at the canopy above. Through gaps in the leaves, he could see alien stars. Somewhere up there, the expedition was waiting, probably convinced he was already dead. They were wrong. He was more alive than he had been in years. "Thank you," he said to the forest, "for letting me stay." The darkness did not answer, but somewhere in the depths of the Blackwood, something ancient stirred. Something that had not felt curiosity in 3,000 years. Something that was beginning to wonder if this strange, small creature might be worth knowing. Spent 3 weeks in the Blackwood. Back at Base Camp Sigma, the expedition had given him up for dead after 5 days. His communication beacon had gone silent on the second night, crushed by a falling branch that might or might not have been an accident. Lieutenant argued against sending a recovery team, knowing it would only result in more bodies. "If he is dead, we cannot help him," she told Commander. "If he is alive, he does not need our help." Inside the forest was learning things no one had ever learned before. The Blackwood was not a forest, not in any way he had understood the word. It was a single organism, a network of roots and branches and neural fibers that stretched across 2 million square kilometers. Every tree was connected. Every vine, every leaf, every spore was part of a vast living system that thought and felt and remembered. The forest was alive in the way humans were alive. It had a mind. Discovered this on his 8th day, when he woke to find the trees around his clearing had moved during the night. Not by much, just a few meters, but enough to form a protective circle around him. The next morning, he found water pooled in a hollow that had not existed before. Fresh water, clean and cool, placed exactly where he could reach it. The forest was taking care of him. He began to talk to it, not because he expected answers, but because silence felt wrong. He told it about Earth, about the forests of his childhood, about his grandmother and her life's work. He described the climate wars, how humans had nearly destroyed their own planet before learning to heal it. He talked about guilt and redemption and the slow, patient work of restoration. On the 15th day, the forest answered. It did not use words. It did not have a mouth or a voice or any way to produce sound. Instead, it pushed feelings directly into his mind. Emotions that were not his own. Memories that belonged to something far older than any human civilization. Pain, that was the first thing he felt. Generations of pain, layered on top of each other like scars. The forest showed him what the outsiders had done over 3,000 years. Ships landing on its body. Machines cutting into its flesh. Fire raining from the sky, burning away years of growth in seconds. Researchers who came with tools and weapons, who took samples without asking, who treated the Blackwood as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. The forest had learned from these experiences. It had learned that outsiders meant suffering, so it killed them, every single one, not out of hatred but out of self-defense, the same way a wounded animal might bite anyone who came near. But beneath the pain felt something else, something the forest had not allowed itself to feel in a very long time. Loneliness. 3,000 years of isolation. 3,000 years of being seen as a monster, a threat, a problem to be solved. The forest had forgotten what it felt like to be understood. It had forgotten that understanding was even possible. Sat very still as these feelings washed through him. Tears ran down his face, though he was not sure if they were his tears or the forest's. When the flood of emotion finally stopped, he found himself kneeling on the ground, his hands pressed flat against the soil, his heart beating in rhythm with something much larger than himself. "I understand," he said. His voice was barely a whisper, rough with emotion. "On my world, we did the same things. We burned our forests. We cut them down. We poisoned the soil and the air and the water. We did not listen until it was almost too late." The forest stirred around him. Branches creaked. Leaves rustled. Something was listening. "My grandmother spent her whole life fixing what others had broken. She walked into dying forests and stayed with them until they healed. She taught me that patience is more powerful than any weapon. She taught me that listening is more important than speaking." He pressed his hands deeper into the soil, feeling the network of roots beneath the surface. The forest's heartbeat, its thoughts. "You have been alone for so long. You have been hurt so many times, but I am not here to take from you. I am not here to study you or exploit you or burn you down. I am here because someone needed to listen, and I know how to listen." The ground trembled again, but this time the tremor spread outward from in widening circles. The trees around him began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter. The air filled with scents he could not name, sweet and sharp and ancient. The forest was showing him something. Images flooded his mind. A time before the outsiders came, when the Blackwood had covered the entire planet, when it had been young and growing and full of hope. The forest had been curious then, reaching toward the sky, wondering what existed beyond the clouds. Then the first ships arrived, then the cutting began, then the fire. But the images shifted, showing something else. The ginkgo cutting had planted. It was still alive, somehow thriving in alien soil. The forest had not rejected it. Instead, it had welcomed the little earth plant, integrating it into its own network, learning from its genetic structure, studying the world it had come from. The gift mattered. The act of giving mattered. After 3,000 years of visitors who only took, someone had finally offered something in return. On the 21st day, the forest made an offer. It could not speak the offer in words, so it spoke in images and emotions. It showed him a future where the Blackwood was no longer alone, a future where someone could translate between the forest and the galaxy, a future where outsiders came with gifts instead of weapons, with questions instead of demands. It showed him what he would have to become to make that future possible. Understood what the forest was asking. It wanted a bridge, a translator, a guardian who could stand between the Blackwood and the rest of the universe. It wanted someone to speak for it, someone to protect it, someone to help it trust again. The price would be high. The bond would change him in ways he could not fully predict. He would become something not quite human, connected to the forest forever, unable to fully return to the life he had known. He thought about his grandmother, about the forest she had saved, about the years she had spent walking through dying places, showing them that healing was possible. He thought about the Blackwood, about its pain and its loneliness and its desperate hope that maybe, after 3,000 years, someone had finally come who was worth trusting. He thought about what it meant to belong somewhere, to have a purpose, to find a home in the most unlikely place in the galaxy. "Yes," he said, "I accept." The forest embraced him. Light poured into his body, through his skin, into his blood and bones and brain. He felt roots growing through his thoughts, connecting him to something vast and ancient and impossibly alive. When it was over, Park was no longer just a human. He was something new, something that had never existed before. He was the guardian of the Blackwood. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Death Forest was no longer alone. Emerged from the Blackwood on a gray morning, exactly 22 days after he had entered. The guards at the barrier saw him first and almost shot him before they realized what they were looking at. He looked different. His eyes had changed, carrying a soft green glow that was visible even in daylight. His skin showed patterns like wood grain, subtle lines that traced along his arms and neck. He moved differently too, with a slow grace that seemed almost inhuman. Lieutenant reached him before anyone else. She stopped 3 meters away, her hand resting on her weapon, her eyes searching his face for any sign of the man she had known. She asked carefully. He smiled. It was a strange smile, both familiar and strange at the same time. I am still me, but I am also something more now. Behind her, Commander was shouting orders. Soldiers surrounded, their weapons raised. The commander pushed through the circle, his 4 arms rigid with tension. You will come with us immediately. Medical quarantine, full examination. I want to know exactly what that forest did to you. Did not argue. He understood their fear. He would have been afraid too before. But the forest had shown him so much. It had shown him that fear was often just another word for ignorance, and that ignorance could be cured with patience. They put him in an isolation chamber while doctors ran tests. The results confused everyone. His blood contained new compounds that did not exist in any database. His brain activity showed patterns that should have been impossible for a human mind. His body had changed at the cellular level, incorporating biological material from the Blackwood into his own systems. But he was not sick. He was not dying. If anything, the doctors said, he was healthier than he had ever been. Visited him on the second day. She sat outside the transparent wall of his chamber and looked at him for a long time without speaking. The forest let you go, she finally said. It did not let me go, it sent me back, pressed his palm against the wall. There is a difference. Why? Because I have work to do out here. The forest cannot speak to the Galactic Union. It cannot explain itself or defend itself or negotiate for its own survival. It needs someone who can do those things for it. Leaned forward, and that someone is you. Yes. She studied him carefully, the green glow in his eyes, the patterns on his skin, the calm certainty in his voice. This was not the quiet botanist who had sat at the barrier's edge 3 weeks ago. This was something new. What does the forest want? She asked. Was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight it had not carried before. It wants to be left alone, but it knows that is not possible anymore. The galaxy will not stop coming here. The Union will not stop trying to understand it, so it wants the next best thing. Which is recognition, protection, a formal agreement that guarantees it will never again face exploitation or attack. He met her eyes. The Blackwood is willing to negotiate. It is willing to allow limited research access, even to share some of its secrets, but only if the galaxy agrees to treat it as an equal, not as a resource, not as a threat, as a sovereign entity with rights of its own. Sat back, that is, unprecedented. I know. The Union has never granted rights to a non-humanoid consciousness. The legal frameworks do not exist. Half the council will think this is insane. I know that too. And the other half will want to use you, to study you, to figure out how the bond works so they can replicate it. Nodded slowly. Probably, but I did not accept this role because it would be easy. I accepted it because it was necessary. Commander wanted to keep in quarantine indefinitely. He saw the Guardian as a contaminated asset, potentially dangerous, certainly unpredictable, but fought him at every step. He is the first person to survive the Blackwood in 3,000 years, she argued during a command meeting. He is the only person who can communicate with it. If we lock him up and throw away the key, we lose any chance of understanding this world. Understanding it, clicked his mandibles in frustration. The forest is a weapon, a biological defense system that has killed hundreds of our people. Now it has created an agent, a spy who wears a human face but serves alien interests. Why should we trust anything he says? Because the alternative is another 3,000 years of failure, stood her ground. We can keep sending expeditions. We can keep losing people. We can keep treating the Blackwood as an enemy to be defeated, or we can try something different. We can listen. The argument went on for days. Meanwhile, sat in his isolation chamber and waited. The forest was with him constantly now, a presence in the back of his mind, patient and watchful. It was afraid, not of the soldiers or the scientists, but of rejection. After so long alone, it had finally found someone willing to speak for it. The possibility that this chance might be taken away was almost too painful to bear. Sent reassurance through their bond, feelings of hope and determination, images of humans who had fought impossible battles and won. "Trust me," he whispered silently, "I will not let them silence us." His sister arrived 2 weeks later. Park was a legal advocate for the Galactic Union, specializing in treaties. She was younger than by 4 years, sharper-tongued, more ambitious. When their grandmother had died, she had not even come to the funeral. Her career was too important. The stars called too loudly. But she came to 7 when she heard what her brother had become. They met in the isolation chamber, separated by transparent walls, stared at him with wide eyes, taking in the changes that the doctors had documented in their reports, but that photographs could not fully capture. "You look like something from a nightmare," she said. "Thank you. I am serious. What did you do to yourself?" He told her everything, the 3 weeks in the forest, the bond, the offer, the hope that maybe, for the first time in 3,000 years, the Blackwood could find peace. Listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Grandmother would be proud," she finally said. "She always said you understood things the rest of us could not see. Will you help me?" She looked at him, at the brother she had left behind when she went chasing stars. The brother who had stayed on Earth, planting trees and tending forests while she built a career among alien civilizations. The brother who had somehow, impossibly, become a bridge between worlds. "Yes," she said, "I will help you write the treaty." The negotiations took months. Worked around the clock, drafting documents, arguing with council members, building alliances with species who had grown tired of the Blackwood's violence. Provided testimony, descriptions of the forest's consciousness, translations of its needs and wants. The treaty passed by a narrow margin, 3 votes, hundreds of years of policy overturned by 3 votes. The Blackwood became the first non-humanoid entity granted protected status under Galactic Union law. Its borders were declared sovereign territory. Research access was allowed only with permission, only with gifts offered in return, only under the supervision of the Guardian. Park was no longer just a human botanist. He was an ambassador, a voice for something ancient and vast, and finally, no longer alone. When he returned to the forest to deliver the news, the trees sang, not screaming this time, not pain, something else. Joy. 10 years had passed since the treaty was signed. Park stood at the edge of the clearing where he had planted his grandmother's ginkgo cutting. The tree was 12 meters tall now, its fan-shaped leaves bright green against the purple and black of the surrounding Blackwood. Earth plants grew around its base, oak saplings and pine seedlings that had somehow learned to thrive in alien soil. A piece of home, growing stronger every year. He was 42 years old, though the forest's influence had slowed his aging. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and lines had formed around his eyes, but his body was still strong. The green glow in his eyes had deepened over the years, and the wood-grain patterns on his skin had spread across his chest and back. He looked less human now than he had on that first day when he emerged from the Blackwood, but he felt more himself than ever. The planet had changed around him. Research stations dotted the forest's edge, staffed by scientists from dozens of species who had learned the proper way to approach the Blackwood. They did not come with drones and cutting tools anymore. They came with gifts, seeds from their home worlds, samples of soil and water, stories about their own forests, their own ecosystems, their own relationships with the natural worlds they had left behind. The forest accepted them, one by one. It shared its secrets willingly now, offering biological compounds that had revolutionized medicine across the galaxy. Plants that could cure diseases previously thought incurable, fungi that could break down industrial pollutants, organisms that could help restore damaged ecosystems on worlds far from seven. The Blackwood had gone from being a death world to being a source of life. Had trained others to follow in his path, humans mostly. There was something about his species that the forest found easier to understand. Maybe it was their history, the way they had nearly destroyed their own planet before learning to heal it. Maybe it was their stubbornness, their refusal to give up even when everything seemed lost. Maybe it was simply that humans had been the first to try something different. Whatever the reason, a new generation of guardians was growing. Young men and women who had chosen to dedicate their lives to building bridges between the Blackwood and the rest of the galaxy. They would never bond with the forest the way had, but they could learn its language. They could translate its needs. They could continue the work he had started. Admiral visited on the 10th anniversary of the treaty. She had risen far in the military hierarchy, commanding a fleet that patrolled the outer reaches of Union space. Her hair was white now, and she walked with a slight limp from an injury she had taken during a border conflict 3 years ago. But her eyes were still sharp, still watchful, still looking for threats that others might miss. She found sitting beneath the ginkgo tree, his eyes closed, his mind connected to the vast network of roots and branches that spread across the continent. Communing with the forest, she asked. He opened his eyes and smiled. Listening, there is a difference. Still with that line. She sat down beside him, groaning slightly as her knee protested. 10 years and you still say the same things. Some things do not change. She looked around at the clearing, at the earth plants growing alongside alien life, at the purple light filtering through the canopy above. The Union Council has been discussing something. They want to know if other death worlds might respond to your approach. Nodded slowly. I have heard. There are 3 more planets under quarantine classification, hostile ecosystems that have killed every expedition sent to study them. She paused. They want you to try. No. She raised an eyebrow. No, just like that. This forest chose me. I did not choose it. He reached out and pressed his palm against the ginkgo's bark. The bond we share is unique. It cannot be repeated or transferred or onto another world. Those other planets will need their own guardians, people who are called to them specifically, people who are willing to give everything for a chance at understanding. And if no one answers the call. Was quiet for a long moment. Through his connection with the forest, he could feel the slow pulse of life spreading across the continent. Millions of trees breathing in unison. Billions of organisms working together as one vast mind. The Blackwood was healthier than it had been growing stronger every day, reaching toward a future that had once seemed impossible. Someone will answer, he said finally. That is what humans do. When there is a challenge that seems impossible, when there is a problem that no one else can solve, when there is a door that everyone else is afraid to open, we knock. We keep knocking until someone answers. Smiled slightly. The cockroaches of the galaxy. I prefer a different term now. Which is? He looked at her with those glowing green eyes, and she saw something in them that she had not seen before. Not just peace, not just certainty, something older than that. Something that had been passed down through generations of humans who had learned to work with nature instead of against it. "The gardeners of the galaxy," he said. "We do not conquer, we cultivate, we do not destroy, we grow. That is what my grandmother taught me. That is what the forest taught me. That is what humanity can teach the rest of the universe if we are patient enough to try." The forest rustled around them. Through the bond, felt its agreement, its pride, its hope for a future where other worlds might find their own guardians. Stood and looked at the towering trees, the impossible alien life that had once killed so many of her people. She thought about humanity's reputation, the survivors, the adapters, the species too stubborn to die. Maybe was right. Maybe survival was not about being the strongest or the most advanced. Maybe it was about being willing to sit down, shut up, and listen. "Humanity first," she said quietly. It was an old phrase, a rallying cry from wars that had ended decades ago. Shook his head. Humanity together, with everything else that is willing to share the universe. He closed his eyes and reached out through the bond. The forest responded instantly, sending warmth and light and gratitude through every fiber of his being. It showed him what it saw, what it felt, what it remembered. 3,000 years of pain, 10 years of healing, a future that stretched out like an endless canopy of stars. His grandmother had believed that forests could teach humans how to be better. She had spent her entire life proving that damaged things could be repaired, that broken relationships could be healed, that patience and love could overcome centuries of fear. The Blackwood had proven her right. In the clearing beneath the ginkgo tree, surrounded by earth plants growing in alien soil, Park smiled. He was home. He had always been home. It had just taken him a journey across the stars to realize it. The forest hummed around him, a vast and ancient song that no one else in the galaxy could hear. A song of welcome, a song of gratitude, a song of a future where death worlds became garden worlds, where monsters became friends, where the universe learned to grow together instead of tearing itself apart. The Death Forest had rejected all outsiders for 3,000 years, but it had chosen a human as its guardian. And that had made all the difference.